Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure and privilege to be with you here today with this renowned panel. And we're going to discuss a topic that's probably on everyone's mind about the hot topics in communication in 2024. It's the first joint webinar between ICCO and Ruepoint, and we're very pleased to have with us a great panel of speakers who probably don't need any introduction, but I will, just in case, for those of you who haven't come across them before, introduce each of them to you. We have with us Adrian Monck, the former Managing Director of the World Economic Forum, Boaz, Paldi, the Chief Creative Officer of the United Nations Development Programme, and Morbin, the Executive Director of the International Communications Consultancy Organization, ICCO. My name is Raina, and I'm a co-founder and COO of Ruepoint, a global media intelligence company headquartered in Dublin, which helps organizations demonstrate the value of PR and communication. Before we start, a quick note, we have opened the chat for questions, and we will take some of those questions towards the end. So please feel free to post any questions or comments you have for our guests. We'll try and pick as many of those as possible. And so just to kick off, I guess, as one of the topics that's on everyone's mind and top of everyone's agenda, the US, the UK, and many other democracies around the world are preparing to go to the polls in 2024. So what are some of the more uncomfortable scenarios that we should all be paying attention to and preparing for? Obviously, with the rise of generative AI, the risk of mis and disinformation is getting bigger and bigger. Disinformation is cheaper, but it's also faster than ever before. This is only one probably of many concerns that all of us have on our minds. What do you think we should be worried about, and how should we prepare, probably more importantly, if at all, for those situations? Anyone, Adrian? Maybe?
Who'd like to kick off?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, look, there's something like 70 plus elections going to take place around the world this year. And, some of them are going to play in places where we might think the results are a little predictable, like Moscow. And some of them in places where it's going to be a little bit more contested, probably like the UK and, of course, the United States. But, in the information space, we're a little bit in democracies like, chickens organizing elections when they haven't really made preparations to keep the foxes out. And the disinformation space is a huge open goal for any malicious actor wanting to interfere in the work of another state. And I think that's something that we're all going to have to get to grips with, because if you want to have a public sphere that is protected, you actually need some protections in place. And I think, disinformation we've seen, for example, robocalls in New Hampshire with fake voiced Joe Biden telling people not to bother to go and vote. There's all kinds of ways that artificial intelligence can affect the disinformation ecosphere. But I think good old fashioned techniques of just conspiracy theories, viral stuff, these are the kind of things that comms professionals are going to be looking at as we move into this election year.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, to kind of turbocharged AI misinformation wars based on what we've seen from previous elections. A point that we made in another call was that the governments that win these elections will likely do so by wielding, controlling, and using the AI to their advantage. It does tend to be to the advantage of more right-wing populist governments, and those are some of the winners of the more recent kind of global elections that we've seen in Netherlands or Argentina. And then the other thing I think is that there'll be increased polarization, just more and more polarization, and pushing people in opposite directions away from each other. Increasingly, any kind of political affiliation, whether it's tenuous or genuine, will be jumped on, scrutinized, put under a magnifying glass. Just someone that's on a board of a an organization that's made a donation to a political party, of course, it's a good thing that there's scrutiny on these sorts of potential conflicts of interest. But I just think we'll see more and more attempts to discredit genuine voices. And rather than a battle of kind of genuine arguments and ideas, there'll be a battle of trying to discredit and say this is fake or this isn't true or you can't trust this, instead of genuinely kind of debating policies, which will be, bad for public debate.
I think we face a very, very significant crisis in misinformation and disinformation, and we almost live in a post-truth world. And I think that is one of the major crises that faces humanity as we move forward. I think elections or no elections, it's something that we have to contend with every day. There's misinformation about many other aspects of society. There's much misinformation about the climate emergency, about we saw it very heavily during the COVID crisis. So humanity needs to come to terms with this problem and face it head on. There needs to be. This is not only about a year where we have so many elections. It's a crisis that we're going to have to contend with and somehow manage. And AI is making it so much worse. So somehow, I think there needs to be a very strong push towards solutions around what we can do, how we can fight this crisis, what's the viable options, and I think that's really, really important to keep in mind.
And I guess,
yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, sorry, Raina, I was just going to come in and echo what Boaz and Rob both said, which is, bad actors are fast adopters. They're onto this technology before governments and regulators even get their act together. And as Rob rightly said, they choose wedge issues. We know that disinformation doesn't change people's minds. What it does is it demoralizes them. It stops them turning up to express their democratic vote. It kind of, takes them out of the electoral process. And that's the kind of impact that we haven't really seen politicians wanting to come to terms with. It's almost become accepted that it's part of the noise of the election process. That's really bad news, I think. And it's something where, comms professionals are going to have to be dealing with that, with public information, and with a whole range of different other things in this year. And I think it's going to be a big challenge for the industry.
Just from what you said, I guess, let's talk a little bit about some of the nuances. What AI gives campaigns and politicians, so as you said, malicious actors, is not only access to something that's fast, but also something that can create very emotionally compelling campaigns, right? It's not just generic, kind of, information that is general and not necessarily tailored, but also, interestingly, very hyper-personalized campaigns to targeted individuals. Talk about the risks of that hyper-personalization and maybe kind of the emotional aspect that can be harnessed with generative AI, with the speed and at the cost that it is available now, which has never been before, or certainly not until about a year ago or so.
Well, I think
I mean, the segments.
Go on, Adrian. No, go on, Adrian. Please.
I was just going to say the segmentation that you can achieve with tools like AI is pretty intense. If you look back and see, for example, in the Minneapolis riots in the US, we know that Russian-backed misinformation campaigns targeted people on both sides. They actually were encouraging people to protest against police brutality, and also encouraging people to take on protesters against police brutality. So, you've got this incredible ability of, these tools to help you divide people and really appeal to kind of micro constituencies to create more trouble.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that when the algorithms that are being manipulated are not sending you things that are trying to change your mind or make you think differently about something, they will very specifically find something that you already believe or already have a suspicion about or a little bit of annoyance about, and they will hone in on that and try and increase that feeling, increase that emotion, and entrench that view. And so it's not all the kind of campaigns that governments do and that NGOs do around spotting misinformation and spotting fake videos, fake things, I think are often regarded as, we'll try and spot the fake things that are being put out by the other side, by the other team, and we'll discredit them and we'll let everyone know that they're not playing by the rules. People are very much less able to spot fake news or misinformation when it agrees with the views that they have already. They'll be just subconsciously much more lenient and less critical of information being pushed towards them. And I think that's the danger. And that's where maybe the education and some of the kind of public information campaigning needs to be improved, that it's not just about identifying the opposition or people doing obviously malevolent things. It's very subtle. It's things that support, opinions or views that you might already agree with, but it still warrants scrutiny and spotting the difference between that real information and misinformation.
I think there's we're also, on the other hand, missing an opportunity here, because AI is an incredible tool. It needs to be thought out very carefully. It needs to be regulated. There needs to be rules and regulations around it. Government needs to act. But the idea of AI is just phenomenally exciting in many ways, because it can take us to so many next levels in technology, next levels in communication. And so, but what we're seeing now is only the negative part of it, because of all this misinformation and disinformation and deep fakes. We're not seeing the positive impacts that AI can have. And so I think, people are becoming more and more afraid of it and tend to be weary of it. We are, the United Nations, I am launching a new campaign in March, and I've embraced AI and I'm using it in order to translate the campaign to many more languages that we could have afforded to translate easily and without any problem at all. But I am going to, of course, be very open about the fact that it's AI, that we're not trying to create a deep fake, but in fact trying to reach more people with a very important message. And I think that's another danger that we because there is a lag, as Adrian said, between the early adopters and the regulations that have to come with it. We're going to be suffering from a lag in technology on the good side of things.
That's a great point, Boaz, and I'll come back to the possibilities aspect of it, because it's really important to talk about those opportunities that it creates for us and for everyone around us, really, not only in our industry. Just touch upon a little bit the regulation aspect of it. You spoke about the need for governments, obviously, to play a role in preventing mis and disinformation and regulating generative AI. The EU is probably the first institution out there which is going to introduce the AI Act, hopefully in February, March this year. It's taken a while, but is probably the only one out there, first of its kind, really, which is currently in the making. Why are governments, Adrian, in your view, so late when it comes to regulate? And it's not the first example, right? Look at 10 years ago with social media, say.
Sure. Look, I think there's a lot of nervousness about regulating speech in all governments in free societies. But, it's not something that hasn't happened before. We've got, in a lot of democracies, rules about what you can and can't say about people's ethnicity, about their race, about their religion, all kinds of things like that. A lot of the time, honestly, it's will that's missing, will and speed. And it's actually on the business side. Look at something like Twitter, where you had viral pictures of Taylor Swift going nuts on the internet. Twitter acted really, really fast and stopped people being able to search for it. I mean, that's quick. That's instant, right? That's the speed at which we need people to respond, But, we're not all Taylor Swift. We don't all have access to the kind of, fame and kind of, power and presence that she has. But we do need the platforms to respond as if we're all Taylor Swift when it comes to dealing with these issues, because, we deserve to have our rights respected, and we deserve to have the same kinds of treatment that is available for kind of Hollywood A-listers. And that's the gap, I think.
Adrian, and do you think, you said that we need the platforms to act on this, as they have done in the case with Twitter and Taylor Swift, but is there anything that could be in place so that governments have that same power, or are we relying on Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg to make the calls for us, where they'll have their own biases? They're both US based, and it sort of removes a lot of power from national governments if we're relying on the platforms to be regulating.
I mean, Rob, you're absolutely right. We've internalized American law on speech because of what we've allowed platforms to do. They're publishers, and actually just recognizing them as publishers would be a huge step towards imposing some of the kind of obligations that conventional media in Europe and other democracies have. And, we've seen with public service broadcasting, there are rules and regulations about what media can and can't say. And broadly speaking, they work. People, broadly speaking, in the UK respect a broadcaster like the BBC. It gets into trouble sometimes, but most of the time it gets on with it. CBC in Canada, ABC in Australia, etc. So, the idea that we can't have some kind of rules-based system that looks at and regulates the way we talk to each other is frankly nuts. And it's not borne out by the history or by the way that we've developed. What we've done is kind of take a pass on actually saying a very straightforward thing. If you're publishing something digitally, it's published. There's no such thing as a kind of hands-off, it's not me gov kind of approach to putting something into the public domain, as people are finding out, by the way, on Twitter when they're getting sued.
Yeah. And I guess if we go back to what Boaz mentioned earlier and talk a little bit about the opportunities and the possibilities we see. So it's not all doom and gloom. We need to be aware of the dangers and definitely create, guards and protections for us and government and society as a whole. But there are also possibilities. As Boaz said, generative AI has enabled the UNDP to create a multilingual, multi-country campaign that would have probably not been possible, certainly not at this cost, right? When it comes to the opportunity. What other possibilities do you see generative AI creates to communicators and to the industry from your own examples and your own day work? I know, Rob, you work with a lot of agencies in the UK and around the world, maybe that perspective as well.
Yes, I mean, we actually did a recent survey of our members asking them what applications of AI they think will be most impactful, the World report that came out last month. And I've got a couple just on my notes here I can refer you to directly. So the top one is operating more efficiently, which is self-explanatory, but then also building online communities. Improved employee engagement is something that doesn't often get mentioned, but that's actually ranked as the third top application. And then multimedia content creation is, ubiquitous. But I'd like to focus on actually the improved employee engagement point is important because it relates to the whole topic of ESG as well and employee welfare. And it does relate back to improved efficiency within an organization as well. But as Boaz said, most people in organizations are approaching this AI as it's going to steal my job, or it's something to be fearful of, or it's misinformation, fake videos. It's something to watch out for. But actually, the data and analytics that you can get on employees means that employers can better understand what they're thinking, how they're performing, what their needs are, how their needs are not being met, and put measures in place to improve employee welfare and improve some of the metrics on which they measure employee satisfaction, improve retention of talent, which are other industry issues that can be solved by using AI effectively.
And some of those examples you gave are examples of how we use private data. So we can't not ask the question about the ethical implications of using generative AI on someone else's personal data. What are the risks, do you think, and what are the concerns we should have when we deal with any, proprietary data, be it owned or originated by our employees or customers or partners? What is the right answer to that question?
I think there's certainly a distinction to be made between kind of data around employees that you would have a conversation with them and make sure that it's very clear what data is being taken and what it's being used for in an internal context and a kind of performance improvement context. And then you've got the kind of public privacy issue, which is completely separate, and that's been around for a while. You sign up you buy a new iPhone and you tick a few boxes and suddenly you've signed up to a sort of 50-page contract that no one could actually read. There has been EU legislation that's made significant improvements on that, and I think it is going in the right direction. But yeah, I think it's all about transparency. Do people know what data they're giving away, and do they know what it's being used for?
And I guess ask permission where necessary for that data to be used in whatever manner you're suggesting that it's used and the purposes, right? That's great. Well, look, a kind of quick U-turn in terms of the area and of the discussion. Another key priority, obviously, for everyone, hopefully nobody denies it, it should be on everyone's priorities, is the climate emergency that Boaz spoke about, something that is probably very close to your heart, Boaz, and at the heart of the work of the UNDP. What are the challenges, or some of the challenges, to us as communicators and organizations, brands that need to communicate about the impact of their work and how their businesses need to interact with that emergency topics? How should we be communicating this topic more effectively so that it doesn't become just a regular subject or a focus of, there's an ESG award, or it's all kind of almost become a bit more marketing focused than focused on the goal, certainly with, in some aspects, with the goal and the essence of the work that requires a very, urgent attention.
I think, the communication industry, the creative industry, has a huge role to play in the climate emergency. We are at a critical stage in humanity. We face an existential threat. I can't overstate how existential it is. It's, all you need to do is read the IPCC report that came out in March, and you'll understand, what situation we're in. And the most important aspect of it right now, from where I stand, is to make sure that humanity understands where we are, but also that humanity understands that there is an easy solution to this. So we could all work together and solve the climate emergency. It's completely solvable, and we need to make sure that we act as humanity to solve the problem. The problem with acting as humanity to solve the problem is that we all have to act together. We can't act as the United States separately from Uganda, separately from Thailand, and separately from Australia. It has to be a whole humanity effort to really solve this very, very difficult issue. I mean, I think we are now in the midst of a transition. We are transitioning to a cleaner, more efficient economy. We have technology, we have the know-how, we have the capabilities. All we need to do is accelerate and scale. In order to accelerate and scale, we need to reach as many people as possible, and that's where, again, the communication industry is so vital to this. It's so important that we all have this as something that we think about almost every day. I mean, I think about it constantly, like 24 hours a day, but really kind of like trying to see how we can deploy the right strategies in order to reach as many people as possible, with a message of there is danger and there is hope. So it's not kind of like, it's not, we don't need to create doom and gloom communication products. What we need to do is make sure that people understand that we have things to do, but there are tools and ways to get them done. And and we need as many eyeballs on this as possible, as many hearts and minds as possible, and it can only come through the help of the communication industry, the creative industry, the PR industry. It's absolutely vital that they join. Rob from ICCO joined UNDP in the past year to really kind of tackle this issue head on. They're bringing all of their members into a campaign that we'll be running starting in March, as I mentioned, and we've seen already dramatic abilities of this group of professionals to elevate our messages to a point where really kind of like we will be able to reach, I believe, billions of people.
And I guess we see big investment groups embrace ESG, of which obviously climate is an important part. But I still get the sense that sometimes ESG campaigns or initiatives or programs get some bad reputation, just based on maybe some excessive focus on ESG awards or promotion activities around the kind of accolades rather than the actual work done. So I guess, Adrian, from your point of view, what do we need to make sure that we don't render this whole essential area of how we run organizations, our businesses and society meaningless? We clearly a focus that needs to stay, but I see and I hear more and more analysts kind of disassociate themselves with that whole area, which is very sad to see.
Yeah, look, I think ESG is in the doghouse right now in terms of communications, and I think it's not too hard to figure out why. A lot of the messaging has been very top down, and it's been very much the C-suite preaching that it's seen the light to the rest of the organization, and that's never a great way to message people and to get people on board. It's the kind of 19th century approach to communication, and because people felt it was the right thing and they were doing the right thing and they wanted to say the right thing, they weren't actually thinking about were they the right messenger for that message. And that's what our industry helps tell people. And I think it's time for us to kind of sit back and say, actually, if you want to talk about that kind of thing as an organization, or you want to elevate that kind of thing in this organization, think about how you do it. And maybe having the CEO, give the speech as he or she walks off the private jet is not the way to kind of position it. You have to be a little bit more sophisticated in the way you go about these things, maybe get a bunch of different stakeholders, maybe think through some of the mechanisms you want to talk about it through. And also, not to scare people, because I think we've also done a bloody good job of frightening people about climate change. And, you don't fear people or alarm people into action very often, just as you don't shame them into taking on something. It tends to be something where people see a positive role. And I think that's something, again, we as communicators need to bring the focus back to stories that get people going, that get people excited. And messaging that isn't just, the CEO's decided that we're going to be climate friendly and therefore you're going to be climate friendly too.
I guess a follow-up question from that for everyone. Whose responsibility in an organization should it be? Adrian mentioned the CEO. Is it kind of the C-suite? They are the people who need to be talking about ESG and communicating the messages. Clearly the role of comms as well, but who from a senior perspective should be talking about this?
I think we have to look at it a little bit differently. I think organizations need to change. ESG also, I think, I agree with Adrian completely, but I also think that the ESG is the wrong way to think about it. a business should be ESG. It should be ESG from start to finish. It shouldn't be a part of the organization. It should be imbued in the organization. And that's going to, be more and more apparent as we move forward. Organizations, large corporations will likely lose customers pretty quickly if they don't move in that direction. We see the younger generations being very, very, very entwined within this space, within the climate emergency, within the social emergency, within everything that we're facing, all the different crises that the world faces. We see the younger generation being engaged. We see them, I think it's part of recruitment, it's part of retention, it's part of everything that an organization does. If an organization changes itself into not talking about an ESG, but actually doing ESG, then I think we get somewhere. Then it's kind of like, then we really see the role of ESG being not ESG, but who we are and what we do. And we have, our employees are part of it. And, and we retain those employees better. And we reward them for their work on people and planet. And so I think that is extremely important. That brings us to a bigger point of what is the bottom line. And so that's a much, much more deeper conversation. But at some point, organizations, corporations, communication organizations, others will have to understand that profit can no longer be the bottom line. We need to incorporate humanity. We need to incorporate the planet. We need to incorporate the future of our future generations into the business that we're building in every aspect of it. And I think once we get to that stage, once ESG is a part of every organization, and I think ESG will be out of the doghouse. It won't exist anymore. It will just be who we are. That's the optimistic view.
I completely agree, and I think that ESG is just sort of the latest terminology for something that's been around for a long time. We saw it with CSR, and the climate debate as well. The terminology changes when it gets kind of abused, and terms will inevitably change when disingenuous organizations try to greenwash or just pay lip service without actually implementing the principles that they are saying that they're doing. But I don't think that's a problem for ESG, as Boaz says. It's a talent issue. Young people will scrutinize organizations, will scrutinize the ESG. They often a lot of research is showing they'll happily work for less money for organizations that better fit their values. And consumers as well, of course, are a lot more savvy. There's a lot more intense scrutiny on whether the actions are actually backing up the dialogue. I think it's interesting hearing Boaz, then Adrian. Boaz talking from a society point of view, and then Adrian talking about an organization point of view. And I think it's exactly the same issue in terms of communicating climate. It's that it's top down. And in the past, the kind of society communication has been doom and gloom. It's been sort of politicians and leaders talking down to, and often Western leaders talking down to other parts of the world. And I think this kind of negative communication was not as successful. And now that messaging has shifted towards, it is solvable. This is something that communities can work on together. It's a lot more of a positive communication than a sort of telling off. It's a lot more uplifting. And I think the same approach is necessary within organizations, and they've maybe not made that shift completely yet, where it's not about a kind of top-down telling off of now we're going to start doing things properly. It's bringing people together, making it come across as more of a community project within organizations that everyone can be a part of, rather than this kind of top-down approach.
And I guess, as Boaz said, it's about a longer term prosperity, not only, or shouldn't be, about the short term bottom line P&L result of any activities that we undertake. That's a really good point. I want to take you back to mis and disinformation. We'll probably have spoken about this a lot by the middle of the year, but I think it's a topic we can't really ignore. One of the effects of mis and disinformation is clearly, and research has shown, is the fact that it erodes the trust in information in general. The knowledge and awareness that there is disinformation out there, it's called the liar's dividend, means that in general, people are more likely to distrust information and media, an area that is, you know, close to all of our hearts. And how do we deal with that risk? Because in its own, this is a risk to, you know, people reaching what is actually fact-checked, you know, real, actual information. I don't know who wants to maybe take a look at that.
I don't think there's an easy answer for that. That's like,
Yes.
you know, that's a major crisis that we're facing. I think, you know, I was a journalist for 17 years before I joined the United Nations, and I look back at journalism now and I hardly recognize the industry. The industry has changed so much, and some of it is for the better, but much of it is not, because, you know, I instinctively like many other people, I instinctively trust various organizations that have either an editorial board or have a government backing them. So the BBC is a great example. The BBC News is a trusted news source. I would never think that the BBC News would in any way fake anything or use disinformation. I still believe that until today. But those examples are now far and few between. I can't really, you know, I guess I would trust the New York Times, and I would trust kind of like, you know, Reuters and AP. But it's hard to, you know, it's hard to go beyond that, beyond the very kind of like traditional news sources. And, you know, Adrian said that that Facebook is a publisher. It is a publisher, but it's also a media house. And so they have to be held accountable as a media house, just like every other media house. They need an editorial board. It's beyond my comprehension that Facebook has a single person as its editorial board. And so, you know, for me, that's all comes back again to the regulators off social media, off platforms, this is what started this crisis. And so we need to somehow head this on. I have no answers for this, but what I do have is a lot of questions. I want to see more editorial control. I want to be able to trust media. And to me, kind of like media has to be across the board. It has to be social. It has to be, you know, to me, Twitter is a media company. It's a publishing company too, but it's a media company. And, you know, frankly, I'm not inclined to trust Twitter at the moment. And I'm not inclined to trust Facebook at the moment. And so we need to figure that out. I don't have the answers, but I do have the questions.
I think I'm the same as Boaz, and you know, I think there are a handful of traditional trusted media that, and everyone will have different ones, but certainly the ones that he mentioned, I would agree with, that we kind of know aren't going to not play by the rules. But I think the other danger is that the way we consume even those traditional media is often through social media or Twitter. So it might be a BBC News bulletin, or it might be a New York Times article, but often you'll arrive at that through the lens of Twitter or Instagram, and whether that can be trusted is then just adding another layer of distrust. And then you'll also consume it with, you know, all the surrounding comments and shares and noise that surrounds that article. You'll probably find it kind of third or fourth hand. So it's kind of eroding that trust at every layer. The only thing I think you can try and do is deliberately, as I said before, that the algorithms will direct you to opinions that you already have. And I think this is what people are maybe not often aware of, traditional consumers. And if you seek out opposing views, or if there's some sort of educational information out there to let people know, you know, often what you'll be seeing on your feed is things that are being fed to you because of your existing views. Seek out opposing views, seek out media from other parts of the world, because often there'll be a geopolitical angle to the misinformation, the state-sponsored misinformation. And I think that those are two things that you can do to attempt to filter out some of the biases and the misinformation that will naturally be shoved in your face, and it's actually quite difficult to to identify a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, look, not for nothing from what Robin and Boaz have said, the organizations that we trust and we tend to hold up as being good examples have something, secret about them that no one else can replicate. It's impossible. What's the secret? Standards. Well, gee, it's not a secret. These things come with rules and regulations and ways of doing stuff. You used to be able to, in the 18th century, make bread look really white by adding alum powder to it, which is really not good for you. And guess what? We had rules and regulations about food production that stopped people doing that, because although the bread looked really nice and was really attractive, it was actually, going to cause you serious health problems if you ate it. Now, we're in the same kind of place 200 years later with information, where we know a lot of what is bad about information. We have some pretty obvious and straightforward ways of making sure we know how to get what is better information. What we're lacking is the political and commercial will to make that happen. One of the few good things that Twitter's done recently, I mean, besides sacking all of its people who worked on safety and did all the kind of things to protect consumers, one of the few good things it's done is put in the community notes system, which actually has acted as a kind of very fast-moving way of checking stuff. But, if it can do that, it can do a heck of a lot more. And I think all the platforms can, as Boaz said about Facebook, these guys have sat on the advertising money that's bled conventional journalism dry for 25 years nearly. And, it's time, it's well over time for them to actually take some responsibility and put in place some of the measures that can allow all of us as communications professionals to use those platforms with trust.
And especially this year, I guess, in the year of elections, when clearly in the past we have a lot of evidence how social media networks have influenced an election process one way or the other, or being used one way or the other. The only difference is, I guess, is that you don't need to be Cambridge Analytica anymore. You don't need all the millions of dollars to do it. And I guess that's the risk we're talking about. I'll use the opportunity to pick two questions from the audience, because they're very relevant to this last discussion. One is around the fact that both AI and ESG are missing from the 24 PR industry ethics codes that exist currently worldwide. And I guess a lot of PR industry associations are releasing AI white papers and statements, but the core ethics codes themselves do not reflect any of these white papers. So the question is, do you advocate for PR industry associations to update their ethics codes themselves to reflect treatment of these issues as it relates to ethical communications, so that the industry has definitive rulemaking to guide AI, digital technologies and tools, as well as address issues like greenwashing?
I suspect this might be one for me. Thanks, Mary Beth. So, yeah, I mean, of course, these are integral parts of an ethical code, and they're not specifically referred to. There's no specific reference to greenwashing. I think the code is more general, and it refers to misinformation. I think we do actually have the term astroturfing in there, which was topical when the code was written in 2018. But absolutely, this is, and we're kind of trying to make up for that by having live guidance and recommendation documents that we're bringing out. And it's, I guess we're facing the same sorts of issues as the regulators are. It's about, as a self-regulation body, it's about keeping up with the technology and making sure that our standards and codes of ethics reflect the latest technology. I would say any bad actor that's doing something like greenwashing or any of the bad practices that we've talked about on this call would be in breach of the existing codes of ethics. However, when we've got new talent coming into the industry and they'll be interpreting these codes and these rules with a modern lens and looking at them with the new technology, absolutely we should have concrete examples of what's good practice and what's bad practice in regards to, especially in regards to the latest generative AI technology. So welcome the input, and associations are as strong as the input from members, which we have a lot of great members. So hopefully we can produce something along those lines this year.
We'll share Rob's details in the chat if anyone wants to volunteer. One other question around mainstream media has been shared in the chat, and more specifically around the general mistrust of mainstream media as a source of authoritative information and the status quo. I guess that's a trend that we've seen for some time now. But the question is, how do we reverse that trend? And it's probably stronger in some markets than in others, without a doubt. But is there, I guess there is something we can do, but what is it that, is there any low-hanging fruit when it comes to reversing that mistrust in mainstream media and really news avoidance as a result of that? Or it's too difficult, there's no low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think as Boaz and Robert both touched on in the discussion, that basic editorial standards are a guarantee of authority, and having processes are a guarantee of authority. That's what makes these organizations credible. That Reuters has a set of rules and regs that it goes through when it does a story. That the Wall Street Journal, doesn't practice surprise journalism, as they call it. It actually kind of goes out and puts the story together step by step, sometimes painfully slowly. But, those kind of processes are what gives audiences trust. Now, the question becomes about the mass audience and mass media consumption. What we've seen happen is a sort of bifurcation. People who can afford trust, if you can afford the FT, you're paying for it. If you can afford the New York Times or the Journal, you're paying for them. But they're very expensive. And that level of kind of standards comes at a price. And what we need to find is a way to make sure that as many people as possible can have access to the highest quality information. And I think that's where the crisis in kind of public broadcasting and those kind of models has been really felt. Good information hasn't gone away. It's just gotten expensive, and I think that's one of the problems that mainstream media has.
Yeah, and I'd say as well as expensive, it's a little bit slower. If you're not checking your facts and adhering to all the standards, you can put something out a lot quicker than if you are following the standards. I think those standards do give credibility, and perhaps the traditional media organizations could do a better job of communicating the fact that these are the standards that we're adhering to, and this is why you should trust us. I did see, I mean, the BBC is a good example. They did put together I thought quite a nice sort of 45 seconds video all about the different standards that they have, what the different processes they go to check all the facts and information. And of course, this was kind of posted on social media. Immediately, all the comments are, why should I believe this? This is fake. They don't follow these processes. And you kind of feel really bad because they've done quite a good job there of explaining what the rigor is behind the work. And it's like the sort of Donald Trump press conference, your fake news problem. It's very difficult to overcome.
I think going back to what Adrian mentioned before, if everyone was held to the same standards, I think it would equalize the playing field. But, major media companies are not held to the same standards as the BBC and the New York Times as Reuters. And that's where they, they're able to charge a premium for that. But if everyone was held to the same standards, then we could expect kind of like some leveling out of that as well. There's no conceivable reason why that shouldn't happen. The rigor that is journalism, the third wheel of democracy, the thing that we must and have in our lives at any given moment, has to be guarded by society. It has to be guarded by governments. It has to be in law. It has to be a way for us to level a playing field with these new types of media companies out there. It's I remember distinctly being a journalist for Reuters. I was a journalist for Reuters for many years, and I was in the office in Jerusalem, and there was an earthquake, and the clock fell off the wall and broke. And I still called the ministry in charge of earthquakes to verify, to get a second source.
That's a really good
That's
example.
a great wire story.
Yes. And there's a lot to be said about those high standards, without a doubt, and fact checking. I guess the dichotomy probably is that not all media organizations are funded by a TV license, by all the users, and it's mandated, whilst others will probably need to create their own subscription model. So as Adrian said, clearly that creates a risk as well, because it limits the availability of that fact-checked information to the general public. But one more question from the audience here, which is probably, again, relevant to everyone. They're asking about the geopolitical context at the moment is obviously very, very complex and challenging, with all the raging conflicts in a few places, definitely around the world, at least 4 probably. The question is, what should govern communicators' stance on these matters when it comes to geopolitical conflicts and wars? What is it that
I mean, that's a great question, right?
Yeah,
it's a great question, and Bob, who's asking it, is obviously someone who probably should be up here telling us, because he's someone who stepped down from his role very specifically because of what he felt to be undue pressure politically, and it'd be fascinating to get his perspective on all of this. I mean, I think my only answer is it goes back to having come from the World Economic Forum, which is makes its pitch on global collaboration and cooperation, is I think you have to basically act with principle and good faith in these kind of circumstances. And I think it becomes very, very difficult to know what that looks like, obviously, as geopolitical lines blur. If you look at the situation regarding currently what we're seeing, for example, over the conflict in Gaza, you can see even country by country, there's a different information atmosphere, in Germany, for example, than there is in, say, Ireland or the UK or the United States. And so there's a lot of sensitivity regarding how communicators step in and help people understand how to talk about and how to deal with these different environments. And I think the fact that we're seeing them so localized, and so specific to individual relationships. If you look at, for example, the Baltic relationships, and the Nordic countries' relationships with Russia, where it's a bordering country, where there's real live border issues to cope with, compared to, for example, the Netherlands or the UK, which set 1,200, 1,500 kilometers away. All of these things come into play when you're talking about these kind of geopolitical relationships, and much, much more. And, I'm sure the other panelists that have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think taking stances, as you say, has to be done in good faith, and it has to be something that's relevant to your organization. So just because the latest thing is to support Ukraine or to support Gaza, it shouldn't be something that you're shoehorning into a messaging or branding or trying to bandwagon. I think it's important to pick issues that are authentically ones that you would support as part of your organization or as part of your brand. And if that is the case, then you should know on which side you fall or what your exact view is, if it's being authentically expressed. And if there is no view, then sometimes the best thing to do is stay silent rather than trying to create a view. You've obviously then got as well as the kind of external scrutiny and answering to questions externally, you've got internal questions as well, particularly on things as polarizing as the conflicts that have been mentioned. You'll have staff who have completely opposite views, and so it's important to make those kinds of considerations as well.
I don't think I'm qualified to give advice on how to communicate about these things, especially from where I'm sitting, where we remain as objective as we possibly can. But what I would say is that there's 52 conflicts going on in the world right now. And in all those conflicts, people are suffering. In all those conflicts, there's victims. In all those conflicts, people are dying. And so it's important to remember the humanitarian part of this, and to remember that, humanity has an obligation to try and create a situation where these conflicts do not exist. It's a big ask to ask, but all of us should have a think about that. It's not 4 conflicts around the world, it's 52.
Yes,
that's a great point. And one thing I think that's worth just mentioning, any organization of any size that has any kind of multinational presence is going to have people on its staff who are drawn from one of those countries, most likely. We had something like 85 different nationalities at the World Economic Forum. You had Israelis and Palestinians, you have Russians and Ukrainians, you have Chinese Americans. Every single big multinational global organization is going to have people who have families, friends, relationships that cross the lines in these conflicts. And I think that's something, as communicators, we just need to make sure that people understand whenever they want to open their mouths on these kind of issues, because sometimes people like to speak first and think later.
That's a fair point. And thank you for all those views. I think we have time only for one more question. There's a thank you from Bob here to the panelists. We have time only for one question. If maybe we can start with you, Boaz. The question is, if you had 2 PR predictions for 2024, what would those predictions be? Number one, what would you bet your house on? What's the one thing that will definitely happen? And the second one is a curveball that may come true.
I think what we spoke about in the beginning, the idea of AI becoming more and more prominent, and companies, communications companies, other companies having to deal with AI in all its aspects. I think the curveball comes from the same space. I think the fake news, the misinformation, disinformation is going to be a very big issue that we have to contend with this year.
Thank you. Adrian?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, something I didn't say about AI, but which I think will give some sort of optimism is, I think it's going to be the tool that someone's going to use to break through this year. It's a massive disruptor. It massively levels the playing field in agency terms. It makes little guys play with big guys. And I think that's going to be a fantastic leveler. A time when we see really big agencies coming together, merging. I think there's always got to be room for, plucky, agile newcomers to, take on these technologies and use them to kind of beat the big guys and win. And I think that's going to be something that we'll see in 2024.
Thank you.
So I was going to say something similar, obviously along the lines of the greater efficiency benefits that we can see from AI. We had the big merger of BCW and Hill and Knowlton announced last week that might have taken some people by surprise. So I would say maybe another big merger from 2 of the kind of top 10 or top 20 agencies would be my curveball.
Thank you, everyone. And indeed, thanks for the insightful discussion and your generosity. I know how busy everyone is. But for those of you who are here, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate you listening and hope to see you soon again. Thanks, everyone.